let's take a moment to actually define what a brand is. So this is where I would love to turn to you, and feel free to type in your responses in the chat box. But how do you typically define a brand? What does that word mean to you? And in particular, a personal brand, because that's what we're talking about today. What is a personal brand? Tanya is saying value. Shweta is saying self-identity. Okay. Shagufta is saying it's a way of recognizing and recollecting. Ronak is saying self-identity. And Shweta is saying it is how people perceive us. So it's a combination of how we look, how we work, and how we interact. And Chitra is saying it's something that people identify your product or service with, something that defines us for others. Rosary saying it's a USP that we project about ourselves. Great, all excellent answers, and all certainly touch upon the various aspects of a brand. Let me share with you what is one of my favorite definitions of branding, in particular, your personal brand. And it's as follows. Your brand is the sum total of experiences people have when they engage with you. The reason why I like this definition is for two reasons. One, it talks about experience. So it is talking about how a brand is not just what you see at a superficial level. It is an experience one has at a deeper level every time you engage with an individual, with a product, with a service. And equally, the other thing that I like is that it touches upon this idea of it's a sum total of experiences. So it's not just a one-time interaction, but a brand, especially a powerful brand, an inspiring brand, is built over multiple instances over time. So this idea of being mindful of one's brand consistently over time is also something that's really valuable. Today, we're going to be talking about mindful branding, where we go a step beyond branding and talk about what does it mean when you apply a mindfulness lens to the way we view ourselves, to the way we define branding in the first place. And really, when we look at branding through the lens of mindfulness, what we're really getting to is this. The idea that your brand will be the most authentic and the most impactful when what everyone sees about you on the outside, what everyone experiences about you, is really a function of who you are on the inside. When there is this sense of alignment, when there is this sense of connection, and when it is done consistently, that is when really a brand really becomes both authentic and powerful. And really, this is our core, part of our core philosophy at Shenomics. We're a mindful leadership platform for aspiring women. And for us, it is all about using this philosophy of mindfulness to turn the lens within, so we can all dive within and create the space of stillness and silence and introspection to really ask these deeper questions for ourselves. Who are we on the inside? Because before I can decide what I want my brand to project to the world, I need to be clear about who I really am and what I want to project about myself. And mindfulness is the thing that allows us to be able to answer those questions with clarity. So the framework that we use for mindful branding, it's a process of asking a lot of fundamental questions about ourselves. And these are the 4 questions we typically ask whenever we talk about mindful branding. Today, since we have a short amount of time, we won't be asking all of these questions, but we will touch upon what is arguably the most important of the four questions that you see here before you, and that is who. And what I mean about that will become very clear in a moment. But first, I do want to take a few minutes to set the context about why we are talking about this and why it's so important. So, personal branding, in particular, mindful branding, is one of the foundations of the leadership journeys that we take women through in our work at Genomics. And in particular, what I wanted to highlight is that this program and this particular module is also going to be a cornerstone of our latest offering and our latest program that we are offering to women, which is called The Conscious Woman. It's a 6-month-long virtual journey that begins later this month on the 29th of August, to be precise. And the reason why we created this, so we've been doing this work now for 5 years, and and one of the things that we know for sure, and we really believe in, is the idea of being a compassionate and a conscious leader, especially now when you think about everything that is happening in the world. It's almost without a doubt, it's one of the things that the world really needs, a new kind of a leader, one that has crystal clear clarity about their values and their principles. They lead with compassion, compassion for themselves, compassion for the people around them, and compassion, of course, for our planet. And all of that, of course, requires the commitment to do a lot of inner work. So the kind of a person who can do all of this is what we call a conscious leader. And the Conscious Woman program is our endeavor to support the making of such leaders. Who is this for? It's really for women from all walks of life. So we welcome all kinds of women, although to really maintain a sense of strong community so that everyone can really support each other with similar challenges and a similar set of goals. We are anchoring this program in particular for mid to senior level women, so women with at least about 10 years or so of experience. And this program really rests on five key pillars. So let me quickly walk you through what those 5 pillars are. The first of those pillars is community. And this is something I really cannot emphasize enough, because we've seen the huge value of this, that when we as a community come together and we really support each other with our shared goals and shared challenges, we really have an opportunity to rise, not just individually, but collectively. And that really imbues all of us with a lot of confidence, and we benefit immensely, all of us, from this. The second piece of this, and this is really the foundational element of this program, is what we call the conscious curriculum, which is modeled after our signature program, Women Leading from Within. And there it's really about looking at all the various aspects of being able to live as well as lead with conscious awareness. So the first of that is, of course, talking about what does it mean to lead with conscious clarity. And what we're going to be talking about today is a core piece of that. Being clear about who we are, what we stand for, and what we want to project to everybody else. Then, of course, having the courage, once we are clear about what our vision is for ourselves and for the world, having the courage to continue to work towards that vision and not let anything get in our way, any kind of internal or external barrier. Leading with a strong sense of connection to ourselves as well as others, so we can really inspire others to work with us collectively towards the vision that we have. And of course, empowering ourselves and equipping ourselves with a strong set of capabilities that will really allow us to travel that journey. And finally, and very importantly, how do we, while we are on this journey, continue to also prioritize our care, our well-being, a sense of balance and joy in our life, so we can continue to work towards the things that are important to us with that sense of joy and meaning, and maintain that sense of resilience while we're on that path. The third piece, the third pillar is coaching. So this is where we really want to be able to give you much more focused, much more personal, and focused support in a smaller setting. So the three levels of support that we'd be giving you if you become part of this program is, one is of course group support. So we will be putting people in small groups, each of which would be led and facilitated by one of our coaches who will take you, who will basically support you in working towards your whatever goals are important to you, and helping you work through whatever challenges are important to you, but in a much more intimate setting. Of course, peer-to-peer support, so you will have the support of your peers. And of course, an optional piece of this is to work with us one-on-one as well. And because our focus with this program is very holistic, it's not just about leading consciously, it's also about living consciously. There are so many aspects of living consciously, from how we eat, to how we dress, to how we parent, to how we connect with nature around us. And we will be therefore inviting a variety of guest experts and mentors who specialize in all of these different aspects of conscious living to come and address our participants, and really share their journeys and their insights on these various topics. And finally, and one of the most critical aspects of this journey is going to be what we call the Compassion Project. And that's because one of the things that we've learned from our work over the years is that true integration of any kind of learning only happens when we translated it into action. And because this journey is about conscious living and leading, about compassionate living and leading, the Compassion Project is an opportunity for anyone who's part of this program to be able to create a vision for what does it mean for them to lead with compassion, and to be able to design an initiative around that, and to make a contribution towards that within their sphere of influence during the course of this program. And of course, all of us will be supporting each other to make that happen. So those are the 5 pillars. The three women that you see here on the screen before you, we will be your guiding hosts for this program. As I mentioned, I will be one of the anchors. Of course, I'll be joined by Manisha Singh, who heads our coaching practice, and Divya, who heads our client engagement. Now, coming back to this framework. So as I mentioned, what we typically look for in mindful branding is being able to answer these core questions: what, why, who, and how. And today, just to give you a taste of, we won't be able to go too deep, but we do want to give you a taste of what is really the philosophical foundation for this whole concept of mindful branding. And that will become very clear and very evident with one of these questions, which is the who. So let me talk more about this. Now, why who? So in mindful branding, we don't begin with asking the question, what do I need to do to build my personal brand? But instead, the question we ask is, who do I need to be to build my personal brand? If you notice, the second question is very different from the first question. And we do believe asking the right question itself is really the beginning of this process. If we ask ourselves the right questions through introspection, through discovery, we will start to get the answers that will hopefully steer us in the right direction. So asking the right question becomes very, very important. Why do we say, who do I need to be? Because in mindfulness, really the anchor is in the being. The doing, of course, is important, but we always, always, always begin with the being, because we are, after all, human beings first before we become human doings. Of course, we get so busy and so preoccupied with doing the things that we're doing in our lives, we sometimes forget the foundational importance of anchoring ourselves in being. But being is really where it all begins. So let me shed a little bit more light on this. Now, the two questions we ask are, who are you? Which is really all about, okay, who are you today? But in addition to that, an even more important question is, who would you like to be? And who would you like to be is all about getting clear on, what do you want your desired brand identity to be? What do you want your desired leadership identity to be? Because if I'm clear about that, then I can work towards that. And it is also important to ask this question, because I want my brand to be the process of branding myself. I also want it to become a journey of me becoming a better version of myself as I continue to take those steps towards branding myself. The first question, if we are able to get clarity on the first question, who am I today? And I show up as that moment to moment, then of course, what that means is I am showing up as my unapologetic self, because of which your brand becomes authentic. Because you're being uniquely who you are, your brand will be authentic. However, if you ask the second question, which is, who would I like to be? What is my ideal self? Then not only are you your authentic self, but when you become the best of your unapologetic, authentic self, your brand then also becomes impactful. It also becomes inspirational to everyone around you. And that is really what helps us draw a community of like-minded people around our brand, because they share in our vision and they believe in what we stand for. So the process that we take people through, one is of discovery, understanding what is important to us, then of course applying the wisdom to, how do I take what is important to me and start translating that in a way that the world can see. And how do I do that every step of the way with a sense of mindful awareness? So let's begin with a philosophical perspective to answering this question, who are you? And this is where I will turn to all of you for some help as well. So there are three levels at which one can anchor their identity in. We have the body, we have the mind, and we have the spirit. And each of them are valuable in their own right. Each of them have their own strengths, but we also want to be mindful of what happens when, first of all, become aware of where are we grounding our identity, and what happens when what are the pros and cons, if you will, of anchoring our identity at each of these levels. So let's first begin with the body. So body is my physical identity. So if I define myself with this first level, then what that would mean is I am very aware and maybe even very attached to everything physical about me. So my physical identity is, I am whatever, I'm 5'7" tall, I weigh, X kilograms, I am a woman, I have long hair. So everything physical about me is my physical identity. And it is, of course, and there's no good and bad, by the way, of any of these three. It's just about being mindful of what each represents. So, the good, of course, of anchoring yourself or being very aware of one's physical identity is then you, of course, take more care of yourself as well. And in many cases, depending on what your brand is, your physical identity is going to be very important. But let's also look at the flip side of that. What happens if I am too anchored in my physical identity? What could be the potential con or the potential disadvantage or the potential consequence of that if my brand or my identity begins or is heavily anchored in my physical identity? Let's hear some thoughts around this. Mona is saying it could sometimes become a constraint. Mishri is saying it becomes too superficial. Mhm. Yes, it can be limiting in many ways. Chitra is saying if your physical identity changes, then what? Great. That's a great insight. So if I say I am, in a very philosophical say, if I say whoever I am, so I say I am my body, that is going to create a lot of insecurity around me because my body is changing every moment. I am, and as Rosary is saying, I am more than just my body. Yes, it is important. Yes, this is my, in a philosophical sense, this is the container of who I am, and therefore it is important. But I am so much more than that. So I do not want to become too attached to something that is constantly changing. And at each level, as we progress, our identity becomes more and more stable. So let's look at the next level, which is more stable, and that is the mind. So my mental identity is all about my thoughts, it's about my preferences, it's how I use my mind, it's how I define how I use my mind as well. So for many of us at this level, our identity for many of us would be, how we may be using our mind in a professional sense. So what is your role? What is your professional identity? In many cases becomes attached at this level. This again has value for sure, because we are to a great extent defined by our thoughts and our preferences, and it does give certain stability to our identity, and it definitely is more stable than the first level, which is the physical identity. But I want to probe you a little bit with this question as well. What do you think could be the potential consequence of become or anchoring your identity or becoming too attached at this level as well? This may be a little trickier, but if I say I am my thoughts, what if I say I am my thoughts? Mishri is saying not being able to adapt and thrive in times of change. Chitra is saying I think one would tend to become fixated and judgmental. Shagufta is saying you become too self-involved and too self-centered. Rosary is saying by itself my identity is still incomplete. Yes. Amulya is saying we will become narrow-minded. Ruby is saying thoughts can be limiting. And Rina is saying we can potentially block other people's opinions. Well said, all of you. So while this is a little bit more stable, my thoughts and preferences, I could continue to have the same thoughts and preferences for a very long time, and they may not change at the same rate as, let's say, my physical identity. But still, if I become too attached to them, as many of you have clearly articulated, I do block myself off from other ways of thinking, from other thoughts, from the perspectives of others. As Vanita is saying, maybe then I will not be as open to the thoughts of others. So yes, it is important, but this also does not give me a very secure identity, especially if I think of myself as a person who is constantly learning and who's constantly evolving. Therefore, my thoughts by definition will continue to change over time, and I would want them to continue to change over time if learning and growing and evolving is important to me. So the second level is also not the answer. So here's the question I have for all of you. If we want to have the most stable identity, and therefore by extension a powerful brand, we want to anchor ourselves at a level where um, who I am is not changing moment to moment, but who I am remains anchored in something more stable and more solid over time. So let me ask you, what would that be? What about you does not change or changes at the slowest rate possible over time? What is about you that is unchanging? Amulya saying inner soul. Chitra saying your soul. Vanita saying your traits and your values. Rosary saying my principles and my sense of personal integrity, and Shugufta is all okay. Great, 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 great. So I think all of you are giving a beautiful set of answers, and indeed you are all on the right track. It sounds like a trick question, but it's actually not. Yes, so if it is exactly that. So if I anchor myself at the level of the spirit, what I'm really saying is that my essence or my unchanging core, my spirit is my spirit, and that is defined by my values or my virtues or my core qualities. Call them whatever you want to call them. And that is important. That becomes incredibly important, especially when it comes to creating a powerful and inspiring brand for ourselves. Because let's say I meet any one of you 5 years from today. Chances are your physical identity for sure will be different, because 5 years from now we will all look different. Your mental identity will also more than likely be different, because we are growing, we are learning, and whatever you may be doing today, you may not be doing 5 years hence. So that will be different as well. But chances are, even if I meet you 5 years from today, the one thing that you will still that will still be incredibly important to you is the set of values and virtues that you define yourself by. You would not say something like, yeah, Bhavna, when I met you 5 years ago, courage was really something that was important to me, but I feel like I moved on from courage, and yeah, it's not as important to me. Chances are you may not say them. Of course, we are growing and evolving, and our values also can change, but they don't change at the same level as the other two. So since we're talking about branding, let's take a few examples and see and really try and understand what makes some of these brands as inspiring as they are. So let's look at Apple as an example. So if I was to ask you about, okay, what are the values that you see in this brand, what comes to your mind? What makes Apple, for those of you who are Apple fans, some of you may not be, for those of you who are, what do you think makes it inspiring? Innovation, simplicity, quality. It's about perfection and quality, innovation, simplicity. Now notice how many of you are giving the same answer or similar answers. What this is saying is that yes, even though even though it's, again, going to those three levels of identity, its physical identity has changed. You can just see it from how the logo itself has evolved over time. So the physical identity may have changed over time. The way it is expressing itself in terms of the ideas and the mental identity is also evolving over time. But one thing that hasn't changed as much is its essential core, the spiritual core, which is the set of values that it defines by, which is exactly as many of you are saying, things like innovation, things like beauty, things like clean design. All of those have remained the same over the years. Let's take another example, Nike. For those of you who are Nike fans, what do you think? What do you think are the values a Nike brand stands for? Quality, diversity, comfort, movement, persistence, inclusion. Yes. Resilience, durability, and uniqueness. Great. And again, even with Nike, if you if you look at it from the perspective of those three levels of identity, if you look at, first of all, the physical identity in terms of, if you look at the set of products it's put out there in the world, of course those have continued to change and have continued to evolve over time. Again, the ideas through which it's expressing itself have also evolved over time. But one of the few of the core values, as some of you have identified, that have not changed, goes back to its tagline itself, just do it. This idea of determination, this idea of tapping into your inner athlete, um, this idea that all of us are, at our cores, we want to be winners, we want to feel like winners, um, and um, and that is really what it is, what it stands for. And again, if you see that has not changed over time. So what we're really saying is that the most inspiring of brands, what makes them inspiring, is that they connect with us at a very emotional level. They have emotional resonance. It's not just that they're putting out quality products. Of course, quality is a big piece of it, but it goes beyond quality. It's resonating with us at a much deeper level. And the reason why it resonates with us at a deeper level is because they're very clear and consistent about the values that they're projecting time after time after time after time. And especially if we share those values, then we are going to be much more drawn to these brands. The same, by the way, is true for individuals as well. So you take any one of these leaders, which by any definition, by according to a lot of people, were considered great leaders. You see the same idea. They lived according to a certain set of values. And again, when I speak of values, I'm speaking at the level of being, because our values are what define our being. And that becomes really clear when you look at uh, some of the tributes that were written in honor of these leaders when they passed away. So this one was written by, I believe, Mona is was a relative of Steve Jobs. And this is what she said: love was his supreme virtue. Steve was humble. He liked to keep learning, and he always tried. And nowhere in this tribute was there any mention of the doing. Of course, he did a lot. And that is, of course, an important aspect of why he was considered, why he was as revered as he was. But more importantly, at the end of the day, the reason why anyone has any enduring impact on any one of us and has a lasting legacy is not so much because of the doing is secondary, but it's primarily because of their being, because of who they were, and what were the values that defined their being. To give you just a couple more examples, here's Princess Diana, and again you see in blue a very clear set of values: sense of humor, joy for life, boundless energy. And again, someone like a Princess Diana did a lot in her life, but at the end of the day, if you read most of the tributes that were written in her honor, it's all about her being, not so much about her doing, but her being. And here's another example of Nelson Mandela. Again, you see the words highlighted in blue: courageous, profoundly good human beings, fierce dignity, unbending will. And this was, of course, a speech that was written by President Obama. So here's my question to you. So how do you anchor your being? What defines your being? And that's not always an easy question to ask. And I don't ask this question lightly either, but it is the most important question that we have to ask and answer for ourselves if we want to be able to define an authentic and inspiring and impactful brand mindfully. And in particular, what can help us answer this question: who would we like to be? What is the ideal version of ourselves look like? When I say look like, as in what is our essence of this ideal version of ourselves? And what can help us answer that question is answering the second question: what are your most aspirational values? So not who you are, but what are the values you want to strengthen, you want to be more of? Because in the process of clarifying and then expressing those values, I get closer and closer to becoming who I want to be. And once we clarify those questions, as I said, the mind and body is important, and here is where it becomes important. Once I clarify what I believe my values are, then the second thing that I do that really makes a difference is then I ensure that everything I think and say, so my mental identity, and what I do in the physical world with my physical identity, my actions, that all three of those things are aligned. So if every moment what I believe, what I think and say, and what I do are always in alignment, that is really when a brand becomes truly inspirational. On the flip side, if what I believe is not aligned with what I think and say, that is going to create a lot of internal strife within me. And if what I think and say is not aligned with what my actions, that will create external dissonance, in the sense that your brand then will not be perceived as authentic, because what people are seeing is not the same as what they're hearing. So before I share more examples, I want to kind of pause here, because I know we're going quite deep into this, but how do you go about answering this question for yourself? And of course, in our programs, we go through various mindfulness practices to really create the stillness where you can dive into this question and answer this question for yourself. But I would love to hear what's just bubbling up for you. What is coming up for you top in terms of what's top of mind for you? So if I was to ask you, Vanita, what is the ideal version of Vanita stand for? Or Rosary, or Shweta, or Shija, or Upasana? When you think about the ideal woman in your mind, what does she stand for? Upasana is saying compassion, empathy, and emotional intelligence. Kalyani is saying empathy. Ramya is saying selfless. Shija is saying resilience. Dolly is saying confident and courageous. Beautiful. Shagufta is saying integrity, honesty. Kalyani is saying an explorer. Shweta saying compassionate. And another Shweta is saying kindness and courage, empathy, resilience, courage. Okay, beautiful. So we have a great set of values that each of you want to define yourself by. Beautiful. Deepa saying emotional intelligence. Mona saying transparency. Mukta saying resilience and perseverance. And Pragya saying self-love and share love. Great, great. So here's the thing. Once we have clarity, I mean, having that clarity itself becomes really powerful, um, because our values are like our fingerprints. Nobody's are the same, but you leave them all over you do. And because you leave them all over you, over everything we do, we want to be very careful of what these fingerprints are. So of course, that's the first step of the process. Now let's move on to leaving that, leaving those fingerprints over everything we do. And how do we do that? How do we go from being to doing? So I'll share a few examples from my own life. So three of my core values are courage, mindfulness, and discipline. And let me give you a sense of how I go about translating that being to doing, and also share with you how this has evolved, and how I continue to express this over time. So courage, as I mentioned, is a core value. And by the way, for whatever your values are, of course, it's going to mean something different for each of us. So what courage means to me may be different from what courage means to you, and that is okay. As long as it means something important to you, that's all that is important. For me, when I think about, okay, what is courage to me? Um, and especially now, when I think about my brand and my identity, in the kind of work that we're doing at Genomics, it's really important for me to have courage means having a stronger voice, to be able to express myself, and especially as a thought leader. And last year, when I started thinking about this, I thought, okay, where can I begin expressing myself? And I realized, okay, one of the places I'm going to begin, or do more of, not just begin, but do more of, is let me just put out my thoughts out there, my ideas, my views. And for me, it is an act of courage, because every time we own our voice, every time we express our voice, of course, we are also potentially inviting potential judgment, potential criticism. So there's always this part of you that shies away from that for that reason. But for us, especially with our work, it's almost non-negotiable. This is what we have to do. So that's what I began doing. Then a second value that is core to me and has been for a very long time is discipline. So last year, when I thought about, okay, how do I really go out there and become a greater expression of discipline? So I thought, okay, let me where can I apply greater discipline? Let me apply it in the area of health and nutrition. And one of my weaknesses up until that point was I have a humongous sweet tooth. I know a lot of people express skepticism about that. I normally eat healthy, but I had a huge weakness for sugar. And so I realized, if I'm going to build this muscle, and each of these values is like a muscle, if I'm going to test this out and make it stronger, let me challenge myself by going 100 days without sugar. And so I went 100 days without sugar. And at the end of those 100 days, I posted this picture of myself on Facebook. And something really interesting happened, because I remember after I posted this image, of course, I was just feeling really proud, and therefore I shared this. But a lot of people did comment that this is great. It must have taken a lot of discipline to be able to pull this off. It must have taken a lot of willpower to pull this off. So just giving you an example of beginning first with the being. So discipline is my being. I translated it into doing, and into a doing, which then once it became visible to people around me, the echo that I got back again through the positive feedback was that that what they see is actually discipline. So it's a great way to a great sort of a virtuous cycle, positive reinforcement that happens when what you are trying to be is indeed what gets reflected back. And the third value is mindfulness. And I'm always thinking about, okay, where in my life can express mindfulness in a different way, not just sitting down to meditate in the morning, but what are some of the other ways in which I can practice this. And one of the areas that was very clear to me where I have to begin practicing this is in my closet. Again, one of my weaknesses is I do love fashion, I do love style, always have. But because of that, my closet was just overflowing with clothes. And of course, that's not good for the mind, because a cluttered closet will continue to lead to a cluttered mind. But also, the larger negative impact of that is it does come at the cost of the environment. Excessive consumption of any kind does come at the cost of the environment. So I knew this is something I have to change. So I decided I would go on 500-day shopping fast. And that is what I did. And we created this initiative called the Mindful Closet. And the idea was that over those 500 days, I still want to satisfy my desire for fashion and style. So how do I do that? I decided I would just repurpose and reinvent what I already own. So I have, of course, like any woman, I have a lot of saris that have been handed down to me by my mom and my mother-in-law. And I have been working with a tailor. I've been designing new outfits from these saris and other outfits, and recreating them in the way that you see here on the screen. And I am now it's now, I believe, 450 days. So I have just 50 more days to go to complete this challenge. But again, this is I wanted to give you another example of taking something that is core to your being, converting it to a doing. And because you're doing that consistently, and it is very clear and evident about what that doing stands for, you start to attract other people as well who share that idea with you, who share that value with you, and that's incredibly powerful, because we want our brand to be able to attract a like-minded tribe. We all want that like-minded community. And this idea, fortunately, it's been really wonderful to see how a lot of women in our community have taken to this idea and have tried to implement it in their own closets, in their own ways. And it's just really been delightful to see. Now, one important thing I would highlight is that once we are clear about our values, of course, they will not change over time, but how you express them can change. And in fact, what we want to be able to do is to push ourselves lovingly and compassionately, of course, but to become a greater expression of those values over time. So for me, each year, especially, the beginning of the year, I always ask, okay, if my values are courage, mindfulness, and discipline, this year, what does it mean for me to express that? How do I deepen my commitment to these values? So courage last year was about expressing myself through writing. This year, it's been all about expressing myself visually. So putting out videos, which I'd been meaning to do for a very long time but had not. And I'm glad, because I was coming from that question, how do I convert the being to the doing? It led me to the point where this year it was clear that if we're going to take our thought leadership to the next level, then the greater expression of courage has to be to put ourselves out there even more. And video, of course, feels a little bit more scary than writing, which is why I knew that is exactly what we have to do. Discipline, again, I thought about, okay, what I can do, how do I deepen how do I build this discipline muscle even more? And that this year for me has been about having a very consistent, waking up early and having a very well defined and consistent morning routine. And I cannot tell you, I honestly cannot emphasize enough what a morning routine has done for me, and in general what the enormous benefits of a morning routine are, especially at a time like this when there's so much around us that feels uncertain, and when we can begin our day with some sense of certainty, and we begin our day saying, no matter what is happening around me, but I cannot control what's happening around me, but I can control that I sit down and meditate in the morning for 5 minutes, or I go for a walk for 10 minutes, or I create just 5 minutes of silence for myself. And I do this day after day after day after day. That is the very thing that builds not just discipline, but of course, resilience as well at a time like this. So this has really been a savior for me this year. And then finally, mindfulness for this year for me has been about applying mindfulness again to the space of eating, because it is such a huge part of us, is the process of becoming vegan. So up until last year, I was non-vegetarian, and I have been non-vegetarian for a greater part of my life. But again, thinking about the effects of what that kind of a diet has on the environment, it was clear to me that that had to change. So I became, so I first, of course, became fully vegetarian, and I have been this entire year. And I'm, right now, 90% of my diet is plant-based, but I'm transitioning to becoming 100% plant-based. So just giving you these examples as an example of how you go from that being to that doing. And every time, every year, when you ask yourself, how do you deepen that expression of your values, that in turn reinforces the being even more, and your brand and your identity becomes stronger and stronger, because what you're doing is creating that upward spiral. You're going from who I am today, and every time you take an action, every time you do something that is aligned with who you are, you're growing and you're evolving, and you get closer and closer to becoming the ideal version of yourself. So before we go any further, let me pose this question to you. What does it mean to you to translate your being into doing? And how might you do that? And I know it's not an easy question to ask, but that is the question we have to ask. If we want to anchor our brand around our being and the values that define our being, that is the question we have to ask. So let me put that out there and challenge you. How do you convert your being into doing? Rosary is saying through conscious effort and with regular review on progress. Okay. Yes, the regular review is a really important point. Upasana saying having a personal board of directors. That's brilliant, because if we have a set of people who can give us feedback, that can be very important. Reena is saying through discipline. Suma is saying action is the mother of all accomplishments. Kalyani, observing successful leaders. Anmol, extremely tiny goals. Mishri, by taking baby steps so that change doesn't look so large. Mona, through conscious efforts and review. Deepa saying through regularly reading and updating self. Shweta, through discipline. Ramya saying it takes 91 days to turn anything into a habit. Lakshya, through consciousness and mindfulness. Shija, by living your brand, reviewing and deciding. Pragya, by becoming aware of who I am and doing everything in alignment. Upasana, the first step required is to be aware that change is required. Acknowledging that is a big step in itself, absolutely. Conscious thought and take that first step. And this is an idea that some of you have touched upon, which I will emphasize, that this journey does begin with tiny steps, baby steps, and this is something we do emphasize in our programs, and that in fact is the next piece of this, which we didn't have time to go into today. But in our programs, and especially I see some of our fellows from Lead Like a Girl, you know that the how is all about taking those small, tiny baby steps. And that is really where the magic happens, bit by bit by bit over time. So let me bring this to a close. This process is really us supporting you by asking you or helping you answer these questions, helping you discover what is it that you value, helping you, supporting you with the wisdom from various schools of thought, and helping you answer the question, once you know what you value, how do you choose to express that, and especially express that with the support of a community. And how do you do that with a mindful awareness? Because this is something we have to consciously bring an awareness to, moment to moment to moment to moment. It's not just a one-time thing. So if I say, courage is important to me, it's not just a one-time, okay, I go skydiving and I'm like, okay, that's done. I've done one courageous thing and now I can move on. It is about every moment asking myself, every day asking myself, how do I show up with courage? How do I show up with discipline? All of those values that each of you has been highlighting. So let me close this by saying we would love all of you to join us on this journey, which, as I said, the foundational aspect of this is going to be answering a lot of these questions that we went over today. These are very deep questions and they do take time to reflect upon and answer, but we want to be able to help you answer these questions and then, of course, translate them into a set of consistent actions. So as I said, this program begins at the end of the month. And fortunately or unfortunately, we only have a few seats left. So if this is interesting to you, or if there's any other way we can help you, please reach out to us. And of course, to learn about this program, you can go to shinomics.com/consciouswoman. And on that note, I want to take a moment to thank all of you for joining us today. I hope this was a useful exercise for you, and that you're walking away with some insight that you can apply towards building your personal brand. And we'd love to hear in the comments, what are you walking away with? What might be one insight that you might be walking away with today? Being one's unapologetic self. Sheetal is saying the takeaway for me was self-awareness. Suma is saying going from being to doing. Deepa, inculcating discipline in self from being to doing. Mishri, thank you for the enlightening session. Mishri, thank you for joining us. Shweta, being conscious about building your personal brand from what I am to what I want to be. Shija saying, thank you, motivated to live my brand and to leave a legacy. Thanks, Shija.